Hello and welcome to another episode of the Double 18 podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Nagishi. Normally, we have Rishab Shakiri from the YouTube's The Windy City production to discuss last week's debacle about the Chiefs game and then this week's preview of the Broncos. But he is busy this week, so we have my so-called colleague from the Bear Goggles On writer and online contributor Brendon Donald, who we are hoping to discuss doing Bears themed podcast moving forward. Brandon, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining me.
No, thanks for having me, man. I'm looking forward to talking some Bears with you.
Absolutely. So, Brendan, since this is new, first time for you, please introduce yourself, where you're from, and what do you do right now?
Yeah, I am recently graduated out of Canada. I am a sports broadcaster, currently doing a lot of freelancing, play-by-play, a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff. Do some writing, obviously, alongside you on Bears Goggles now, and yeah, a lot of been big fan for football for a lot of years. Do a lot of personal scouting of college players. That's kind of my bread and butter, mostly
Oh,
doing stuff, and so yeah.
interesting. So you're a scout as well. So you watch a lot of films and watch the tape as well.
Yeah, yeah, I've been
Oh.
doing scouting for college players. Obviously, more armchair scout than anything, as
Mhm.
opposed to like going down and watching people professionally. But I'll spend a lot of time throughout the year looking at players. I mean, like I have a Google Drive right now or a Google Sheet where I have over 400 players of various different positions that I'm watching, just getting myself
Ah.
ready and prepared for the 2024 NFL draft.
Well, unfortunately, given the current state of the Chicago Bears, that is the only thing that we the Bears fans can look forward to right now. So you're relatively young, and so you're in Canada, correct?
Yes,
Okay. What part of Canada?
I'm in Alberta.
Oh, okay. So that's a mountain time zone area then.
Yes, sir.
Well, Brandon, thank you so much and welcome. And this is going to be a very exciting and given your knowledge, scouting, and we're very very excited about having you on and maybe pick your brains about the upcoming college games and which players to look forward to moving forward. All right, let's start off with the last week's debacle against the Kansas City Chiefs, and we had a lot of noise coming out of Hallis Hall. First of all, starting off with the uh, much maligned DC Alan Williams resigning abruptly. There were some conflicting reports about the Fed's FBI raiding his house as well as Hallis Hall, which neither of them turned out to be true. Although Pat McAfee has his sources says it did happen, not at Hallis Hall, but probably at his house, which later Adam Schefter and the others said that he was fired for inappropriate activities or behaviors inside that was not considered criminal. So my guess would have to be very similar to something that got former Boston Celtics coach Emi Udoka, probably got fired for, maybe extra, marital affairs or whatever. So, but we learned with regards to what happened with Nate Davis. I'm going to stop speculating for that one right now. And then Justin Fields complained about being a little bit robotic. And then he said, I'm going to, play carefree, F it. And then unfortunately, the numbers certainly wasn't exactly impressive for a guy who says he wanted to play free. But we'll get to that in a little bit moment. But the other big development story, and somehow that got overshadowed by all those two stuff, was the neck injury to left tackle Braxton Jones. He certainly hasn't had a strong start so far, having committed already 6 penalties in first 2 games, and and certainly the Bears are going to have to play without him for at least 4 weeks now that he's on IR. And Brandon, of all the news that really that distracted the Bears and the Bears fans. What are your overall thoughts and how the Bears have handled this, a fiasco last week that was certainly had to be a major, major distraction?
Yeah, and what a week and what a game to have all those distractions go on. Going up
Right.
against the Super Bowl champions of just,
Exactly.
a game that it was already looking like it was going to be really hard to win anyways, and
Yeah.
now you just add layer after layer after layer. And I remember sitting down when I was doing some work, and I have Twitter open on the sideline. It's like, oh, Braxton Jones is out for or was put on IR. I'm like, okay, well, that's unfortunate. That's going to be the headline of the day. And then it's, Justin Fields going out there and saying, like, I'm feeling robotic, F it, I want to play. And I'm like, okay, that's the headline of the day. And then it's going like, oh, hey, by the way, DC Allen Williams, he is out, and all that news broke. And I was like, holy cow, like, how much more deep it felt like we were just looking at an iceberg. How deep can we actually go with what's going on? And it was just an absolute wild ride. And for me, it was probably Fields saying that he's feeling very robotic. And again, I have a media degree, and so I know how the media world likes to work. And it's a lot of like, okay, we hear this and then we try to run a story with that. And unfortunately, that's kind of the negative side of that world. And of course, Fields went back out and he said, like, I'm not blaming coaches. Like, I'm very much putting emphasis on myself, and it's just one of those things. And I look back at that, and if you watch that press conference in its entirety of where
Mhm.
Justin Fields is talking, he says in the clip, like, it might be coaching, but then he goes, it's a lot on me. It's a lot of this, and that. And so it kind of got taken and was honestly kind of run with by the media a little bit. And you know I agree with what Fields was saying in those comments, where he's
Yeah.
playing very robotic. You could see that a lot throughout these first two games before going into the Kansas City Chiefs game, where it just he just didn't look like himself. Going back to the end of last year, where it was just wow, wow, wow. And you're looking at those games and you're like, okay, well, where's that wow factor? Obviously, as Bears fans, we were saying all offseason we want to see him start throwing the ball. We got him DJ Moore. We have Chase Claypool, who we all thought throughout the entirety of the offseason was going to take that next step. For me, I looked at Claypool and basically said he just needs an offseason to learn the offense, and then he's going to be fine. And obviously that hasn't worked out. And obviously that's kind of the biggest storyline out of Bears this week, of some of his comments. But yeah, I would say mostly it would probably be kind of the biggest drama that happened was obviously the Justin Fields stuff, but obviously Alan Williams, we may never know exactly the full details of what exactly happened on
Mhm.
top of that. And, we're all going to speculate. And there was so much news. I think I heard 8 to 10 different reports of what was going on just with that within an hour. And
Yeah.
you know, I think the first one where I started to see some of the reports where it was Peanut Tillman going in and telling people about Alan Williams, and I
Yes.
was like,
Yes.
okay, like, I know Peanut's, part of the FBI, he's part of the district with Chicago, but this one kind of just feels like,
Yeah. It felt weird. Why would you leak out an information you know, to your former colleagues? I thought that was like a really weird stuff. Like
but not only that, it kind of feels like it would be a conflict of interest on his part as well. And
exactly.
even someone within, like, I forget who I was reading, but he was like, I know someone inside the FBI. And like, I contacted him and was asking him, he's like, obviously I can't say much, but I'll tell you this for a fact: Peanut would not have been involved with that just due to the conflict of interest. And I was kind of sit back
Wow.
going like, that makes a lot of sense. And
Right.
it would have felt like a very, very bigger story if the FBI actually raided Hallis Hall, because it
Hmm.
was just kind of one of those things where it was like all morning, blah, 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 blah. And like they
Yeah.
said, it happened during the morning. And how come Eberflus or Fields, like, it felt like those media stuff would have been delayed a lot more if that type of thing were to have happened.
Right. Yeah. There was just so many conflicting reports that was just driving a lot of us fans crazy. And we learned from what happened with Nate Davis. You know, we learned that Nate Davis had been dealing with family issues, and we learned that the day of the Tampa game, or the day before, a family member had passed away, and I think a lot of people, myself included, we learned a valuable lesson about not making some wild speculations. And I know a lot of people, well-known people on Bears Twitter, took there to offer their apologies,
Yeah.
and certainly, I think we could probably learn to refrain ourselves with the situation with Alan Williams. Two things can be true, and I wrote this on my Bear Goggles On article. That number one, we wish Alan Williams and his family nothing but the best. Number two, in all likelihood, that Williams wasn't going to last as a defensive coordinator, and that the Bears found a convenient way to transition him rather than embarrassing him by firing him. But after only 2 games or so, they found a convenient excuse to hand the duties over to Matt Eberflus, who was a DC before, and now that we can move on from Alan Williams and whatever he was, accused of doing. So I think those two things can be true and be separate. We can wish him and his family whatever that they're dealing with, or whatever they're about to deal with, in tumultuous times. Certainly families certainly deserve their privacy and their spaces. And then, and then we can also criticize Williams' performance as a defensive coordinator, even dating back to last year. So let's move on to the game itself. And, I was hoping, I live in the Kansas City area. I wasn't going to go to the game. I know the tickets were so expensive. I was actually on a business trip on the East Coast, Philly area. I saw a lot of Chiefs fans getting onto the plane, on the flight that I was on, and they were obviously heading to the Kansas City to watch the game. There were certain Bears fan Twitter that I follow. They were also in town to attend the game, and it was so much fun. I would have liked to be there, but I just wasn't really confident about going there in person to watch the Bears, lose, whether it's by 3 points or 30 points. And, the first possession, at least the game it's started, the first 2 positions looked like it was very, very promising. The Bears offense got a few first downs, and after the Chiefs took over in the first quarter and then they scored a touchdown, that's when things kind of started to snowball. And Brendon, I'm sure you probably look at the game yourself. What were your overall thoughts of the game, and what stood out to you the most?
Yeah, unfortunately, there was a lot of negatives in that game.
Yeah.
The Chiefs, again, with all the stuff that surrounded the Bears during that week, it just kind of felt like there was just too many distractions, and
Yeah.
unfortunately, there was just a lot of players that just didn't feel like they were in sync, they were in rhythm.
Hmm.
Looking at Justin Fields, he said he wanted to play less robotic, but it didn't really feel like that, other than maybe the first drive,
Yeah, where he
where
used
they
the legs and rollouts and hit the Chase Claypool, for nice first down. But from that point on, we just never saw anything like that at all.
yeah, and again, when I was looking at the defensive side of things, when obviously we heard Alan Williams wasn't going to travel with the team to Tampa Bay and it was going to be Matt Eberflus calling it, I said, okay, well, this is going to be a great opportunity to see if it was Alan Williams or if it was the defense or if it was both. And in
Yeah.
Tampa, it kind of felt like both. And,
Hmm.
in Kansas City, it was like, okay, Matt Eberflus again is going to be calling the plays. This is an experienced defensive coordinator. He was a coordinator for the Chiefs, or pardon me, the Colts for 4 years, and those defenses were very, very good. And a big
Right.
focus this offseason was for Eberflus to get a bunch of defensive guys that he felt were good scheme fix for him in Tremaine Edmonds, especially. Yannick Ngannou was a big guy that they were wanting to get, and they eventually did get him a little bit later. But the defense, they just looked, again, they looked out of sync, they looked out of rhythm. And unfortunately, it felt like one guy after another just happened to be dropping in the secondary. Jaquan Brisker went down, and it was like, okay, well, we don't have Eddie Jackson out there. Kyler Gordon is currently already out for a significant portion, so our secondary was already kind of depleted. Stevenson's went down with that suspected concussion during that game, and it was just kind of one of those things where you're like, yeah, we know the Chiefs wide receivers aren't the highest class in the NFL right now. They're definitely closer, I would say, to the bottom of the wide receiver rankings as opposed to the top, but it still felt like one of those things where the Bears just couldn't get they couldn't help themselves on the defensive side of things. And then ultimately, whenever they did get a stop, Kansas City's special teams would, again, we're seeing some of the film right here of where they're backed up in their own, basically their own end zone. That's not really a great way to operate. And, this offensive line right now, I think the offensive line has actually been playing pretty good this year. It's just Fields.
You think so?
I think they've been playing better than they did last year. And again, from what they were last year say that they're better this year, it's kind of like going, all right, I'm picking up a rock off the ground, and then I'm kind of looking at it. It's like, yeah, it's better, but how much better is it actually? But I do think they have been playing better. But unfortunately, the Bears have also, in Justin Fields, he's been holding on to the ball just a little bit too long for my liking. And we're seeing, obviously, a lot of that indecisiveness from Fields. We have that famous clip, and, I don't like to do the whole, screenshot situation of like, oh, look at all these open guys. And,
what
JT
O'Sullivan and Tim Jenkins are usually doing these days. So.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't like to do the screenshot. Look at how wide open this guy is. You go back to that Tampa game, and you're like, okay, well, there's two guys completely wide open here. You're watching the play run. You're like, that should just be a quick dart throw. Boom, boom, boom. And you weren't really seeing that. I think that's why the Bears' offensive line is looking a little bit more strugglesome this year. And again, you're going up against this Kansas City Chiefs defensive line. Chris Jones, he's one of, if not the best defensive player in football right now. And having to deal with that, George Karlaftis, he's starting to come into a little bit more form of his own. Having Chris Jones back, that's only going to make him better off of the edge for Kansas City. So it was going to be a rough day regardless, especially with having, Larry Borum playing left tackle. And again, there's a lot of workarounds. I'm interested to see what Nate Davis is going to look like coming into this week, kind of getting back to that guard spot. Again,
well, he had a good week. I hope so we certainly didn't see Nate Davis's name on the reports like we've been seeing, thankfully. So I'm sure he's finally had a good week of practice, moved on, and hopefully he's ready to compete mentally and physically. And Tevin Jenkins is also ready to come off the IR after presumably, week 5, because there's not much time between the Denver and the Washington game. So hopefully,
I'm going to suspect that Tevin Jenkins probably not going to be playing in week 5, just because, again, it's that short week. And I'm always under the opinion of, I would rather have a player at 100% as opposed to 75 to 80%, just because it's one of those things that even if they're good to go on the field, I would rather that guy, if he's going to be out there, and we know Tevin Jenkins is been prone to injury. It's basically every single year he's found himself on the IR sheet when he's been part of the Bears. It's one of those things. I would rather him, sit until, let's say, week 8 if it needs to be, and him be fully healthy before getting back out there, because Tevin Jenkins coming out of Oklahoma State, he was a dog. He was like, people were saying that he is a right tackle Quentin Nelson with how nasty he is, with how physical he is. And obviously moving him inside the guard, I look at that and I go, that's not necessarily a bad move,
No.
because, sometimes the tackles at the college level, they just can't necessarily get up to that, level. We saw that with the kid from Northwestern this year who was coming out.
Peter Skoronsky, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And he was.
Sometimes they have a shorter arm, like that's, I think that was with Skoronsky as well. Sometimes you have to push him inside because of the arm length issues and stuff like that. Right?
Exactly. And with Jenkins, I think he's going to be fine there. Looking at this lovely little trick play from the Chiefs, and yeah, again, the whole Taylor Swift there for Travis Kelce, that obviously was motivating the Chiefs, I guess, to have some really good play in that game. And Travis Kelce, obviously, he's going to ball out. He's the best tight end maybe to have ever played the game.
Right. The Bears defense certainly didn't do any justice with that soft zone coverage. What do you think? Is this defense salvageable, or are we just basically resort to watching, players like Kelce being open in the, the flat, in the secondary? I know the Tremaine Edmonds and the DJ Edwards are certainly having to clean it up, because of the lack of pass rush. But something's got to give, don't you think?
Without a doubt. And unfortunately, when Eberflus came in and he said, like, I want to run this classic Tampa 2 defense, the going back to, and as Bears fans, we're sitting back going to, we're going to go back to the Tampa 2 defense like we saw with Lovie Smith, like how fun and successful that was. Unfortunately, I just don't necessarily think like that true classic Tampa defense is really going to be all that effective here in today's NFL, just because of how much you can exploit that, obviously having the too high safety. But right now, I think the Bears defense, obviously not having that pass rush, we've had 1 sack the entire year. Like I remember looking at that Ravens game before the Bears game went on, and Kyle Hamilton, safety for the Ravens, had 3 sacks in the first half. And I went, he has more sacks than the entire Bears defense, and he's a safety,
Yeah.
I
don't see
didn't think it was
that much with the Bears, unfortunately.
No, and I didn't think it was possible for the Bears, defensive line to actually get worse in terms of sack production this year. Obviously, they brought in Walker, who had 7.5 sacks last year for Tennessee. He was kind of one of those guys where I was slightly worried about when we signed him. Obviously, we gave him
because
that
he's not a
deal.
true edge rusher, right?
Well, it's not that he's not necessarily a true edge rusher. It's just I was worried that he kind of was on a defense last year where he was just able to he kind of overperformed with the Titans, and he had those 7.5, and it was one of those things where I was like, okay, I would be happy bringing him in for like a 1-year type of deal just to see if he can get to that next level and be more consistent with it. But with Walker so far this year, I've just kind of looked at it and been like, man, like, when we're on the defensive side of the ball, we almost never hear his name. And like that's a guy that was supposed to come in and at least generate 5 to 6 sacks this year. I think most Bears fans were kind of looking at that going, if he can generate 5 to 6 sacks, that's going to be a lot better. That's probably going to lead the team in sacks. And Yannick, again, he was supposed to come in and be like, this is a guy, like even I said, if the Bears can bring him in over the last, like he's never had a season where it's dipped below, I think 8.5 sacks in a year, and he only has 1. So still a lot of time for him to be productive. But unfortunately, it's just kind of been one of those things where you're sitting back going like, man, like he just hasn't been able to get to that level yet. But the defense, they need to really figure things out here at the moment.
Yeah, well, this is what Matt Eberflus is basically going to live and die by. If you're on the hot seat like many people think that he is, and certainly the Vegas thinks so, he's at the number 1 coach who will likely to be fired. and perhaps it won't likely happen. Um, you might as well do it your own way, right?
Mhm.
My way or highway. And so basically now Eberflus is staking his own future on his defense, and certainly the first two games have been not encouraging. Um, there aren't much time left for Matt Eberflus and his coaching staff. They have lost 13 games in a row combined now, dating back to last year. The last time the Bears won was a Halloween game against the New England Patriots on a Monday night. So, the fans are getting fed up right now, and rightfully so. There's not much to look forward to, and even this week, Brandon, if you've been following the Bears news, and I'm sure you do, there have been a lot of empty conversations about, Matt Eberflus saying, we had a good week of practice, or, looking into the eyes of, the players and stuff like that. That's kind of like starting to sound more like a cult. And in the, Mark Trestman era, that kind of brings back a lot of bad memories for many, many Bears fans, certainly. And even Luke Getzey, I was like really crazy. Raised an eyebrow about his offense, and building something special and all that kind of stuff. It really, really, just unbelievable. Just the amount of well, I wouldn't want to say amount. I'm sorry. Just the coaching staff that the Chicago Bears have had historically seems to have this problem of lack of self awareness. I'm going to try and pull up the clip, or even the comments made by Luke Getzey here. But give me your overall thoughts on Luke Getzey, and just the comments he said about we're in the process of trying to build something very, very special.
Yeah, and you know, there was a great picture that I saw go out this week after a lot of the comments from Getzey, where it showed Luke Getzey in a press conference with a big old smile on his face, and then it
Oh
showed
yeah,
Justin
yeah, yeah,
Fields in
yeah.
the
I can
next
pull
press.
that. Yeah,
Yeah,
I can
and
pull that. I can pull that up right now for sure.
yeah, and you just look at it, and the caption that I saw with it is, one guy knows that he's currently lost 13 games in a row, and the offense is extremely struggling, and the other guy
Here we go.
doesn't
Yeah.
it doesn't seem to be worried at all. And you know, for me, obviously, I also heard the joke of DJ Moore went up to Justin Fields afterwards and goes, "Man, you need to smile more." And it's like, man, like, yeah, sure, he needs to smile more, be a lot more hopeful, but you've lost 13 games in a row. Like, this is not a time to be, sitting at the podium with a big old grin on your face going, yeah, we're going to build something special. It's like, man, like, this is like, there's alarm bells going left and right with this offense. This was supposed to be the year where Justin Fields was potentially going to be an MVP level type guy. You got him your number one weapon in DJ Moore, and DJ Moore, I think, has proven already that he is more than worthy of being a number one wide receiver in the
Yeah.
NFL, and he's currently
Right.
not even being used properly.
That's a
And
huge, huge alarm. For Ryan Poles to get the guy that you know um, you got him for a reason,
mhm,
and the fact that he's not being properly used, I think that kind of speaks volume as to you know for polls, you're wondering why got DJ Moore, and why isn't is it properly being used? It has to be a head scratcher even for polls. Who gave up a number one pick to get essentially DJ Moore, and the number one pick for next year as well. But I really, really feel that this coaching staff is Luke Getzey, unfortunately, is another line of a failed offensive coordinator Chicago Bears have hired.
yeah.
John Shoup, Ron Turner, certainly. Uh, phew, I'm trying to
To be
figure out
honest
a
with you, the
couple of
last
others.
good offensive coordinator the Chicago Bears have had, and this is going to sound hilarious because of how bad his head coaching career was, it was Adam Gase. Like that's the last time I
Yes,
truly looked at the
yes.
Chicago Bears with an offensive coordinator and was like,
Mhm.
okay, like when he got hired in Miami, I remember I was sitting there going like, no, like we're going to have to try to find this whole new system. Like he was like Jay Cutler was sitting there going back like, I love this guy. This is the best offense that I've ever been in. And that was the best year Cutler ever had, was when he was part of that Adam Gase offense. And like
Mhm.
I'm just sitting back going like, man, like we just haven't had one. And the Matt Nagy era, like
Yes.
I'm just trying to remember who our offensive coordinators were. I remember it was a former Oregon head coach was one of them, and then I
Mark
can't even
Helfrich, yes.
yeah, and then I can't even remember who the
Bill Lazor, those
Bill,
people, but
yeah,
John DeFilippo, there's so many
guys who
people.
just basically did nothing.
Mhm.
And but yeah, and again, Luke Getsy's just kind of down that line yet again of just offensive coordinators who haven't had it done. And for me, when Eberflus got hired, it was very important that he found an offensive coordinator that was going to elevate Justin Fields, because he's a defensive head coach. He needs to take that guy. And obviously, he's not going to sit down and be a quarterback guru like we've seen other
Right,
coaches be,
right.
and he needed to find that next offensive coordinator. And I thought Luke Getsy was going to be the guy, obviously, because he was with that Mike McCarthy and then Matt LaFleur system, and he's been around Green Bay. He's been around a lot of good guys, and he knows some really good schemes. But it just seems like it kind of seems like he is just pulling out the coloring book and going, let's just see if this works. And it's never a good sign when your offensive coordinator and the Pittsburgh Steelers offensive coordinator Matt Canada are pretty much in the same boat. And my buddy is a really good Steelers fan, and pretty much whenever a Steelers game is on, I get a flurry of texts whenever the offense is out there of Matt Canada, Matt Canada, Matt Canada. And I go, man, every
Mhm.
time, everything that you're seeing from that Steelers offense, I'm seeing 10 times fold with the Bears offense. The fact that,
Yeah.
against Tampa, he threw the exact same screenplay without
Mhm.
changing a single thing up 3 times in a row. You're just going, man, like, are we playing Madden here where you're just spamming that button, hoping that's going to work every single time?
Yeah, yeah. It really is, disheartening. This coaching staff really is lack of transparency. They're just basically hanging on to, like small stuff. And then you have, again, Luke Getzey saying that we're building something special. And I think one of the biggest problems that I have with this coaching staff is that they've treated the first couple of games, first 3 games or so, as like a preseason game,
Mhm.
and now they're expecting to, take that step, which I haven't seen anything remotely. You and I can both agree that we haven't seen anything remotely on both offense and defense to say that they're ready to make that step. You have 17 games from last year, and now you have 3 games that you have basically wasted, 20 games total. And that you're telling me now you're ready to build something special. I understand last year was a complete washout with the lack of talent offensively, with no wide receivers, and the offensive line was basically just running mash units. And at toward the end of the season, Justin started to break down and everything. But you wasted basically 3 games of regular season as a preseason game. The lack of preseason was something that I was a little bit concerned, and I think a lot of people were concerned with, because Justin Fields only got like what, 2 series or 3 series, and I think it was a kind of a dangerous move by Eberflus to think that the Bears were ready, and ready to be competitive. It just basically not playing that many regulars on preseason. And I understand the injury factor and all that stuff, but I think it's a massive, massive miscalculation that the Bears are paying massive price, and now they're just basically wasted the first 3 games of regular season at 0-3, and a lot of panics and angers are starting to simmer below the surface right now, don't you think?
Yeah, and for me, I always look at preseason as one of those things where if you're going to put out your players, you got to play them more than the series that we saw. When I first heard that Fields was going to play in that first preseason game, I said, I was like, man, like, either you're going to play him a lot in this game or don't play him at all, because
Mhm.
the 2 to 3 series that he's going to get, they're useless.
Right.
You're going up against a skeleton defense, because even defensive coordinators, they're not showing their hands at that moment, and you're going up against skeleton defenses who are realistically, they're not their full product yet.
Right.
So if you're only going to do 2 or 3 series, I think Fields played less than 30 plays during the
Mhm.
preseason, and most of the starting offense was kind of around that same mark as well. That's not going to get you ready for this season. And if you're going to put those guys in there for that amount of time, you might as well just not even play them during the preseason and just make sure that they're not taking those hits, because we still saw Fields take a few hits that I realistically wasn't happy to see him take. Um, yeah, and but if you want to get this team ready, kind of going back to what you're saying, like, you're first kind of using these kind of preseason games, and
Mhm.
it just not, or these first 3 games as kind of preseason games, it's going, well, you might as well have thrown the starting offense and starting defense out there for at least the first quarter, or the first half of the game in all 3 of them. So that way they at least have that little bit more consistency. But yeah, again, a lot of the coaching staff decisions this year have just really been head scratcher of going, like, why would you do that? And,
Mhm.
unfortunately, I don't know really what's going to be the change. And the only real way that I've been kind of dealing with the coaching staff situation that's happening is going, okay, well, let's start compiling my list of who I think the new head coach of the Chicago Bears is going to be. And, you know, the McCaskey family is very much known for not firing head coaches mid-season, or firing coaches at all at any point during the season. I
Mhm.
think this is kind of going to have to be one of those years where it ultimately has to happen, if the team keeps playing this way, just because it might just get to a point of where the team just
Mhm.
completely quits. And if you have a team that's completely quit, it doesn't matter what the coach is going to say. Oh, we had a really good week of practice this week.
Yeah.
Okay, do you want a participation trophy? Like, what are we doing here? Like, we still need to, like, having a good week of practice when all we've seen is the team get worse week in, week out throughout the season, which felt kind of impossible from last year, where it was like, okay, they were the dumpster fire at the end of the year.
Yeah.
And I think all of us kind of collectively were cheering over the last few games for losses, just so that we could get that number 1 pick. It's never a good thing to cheer for your team to lose, but at the end of the year, I was like, I would prefer the team to lose these games at the end of the year, because it's going to be more beneficial, because they're going to be able to do more with it at the end of the season.
Mhm.
But at the start of this year, it was going, I expected the Bears to be 2-1 at this point.
I was
And
hoping maybe 1-1 or something like that too. Maybe the Chiefs game. That was probably something, the game that I was like, yeah, the Bears have no shot at winning. But
mhm.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I agree with you, but it's just kind of one of those things that, like, I looked at the first 2 games of the season. I said they were winnable games. In one of my articles that I wrote, I said the 3 most important games for the Bears season this year were the Arizona Cardinals game that's coming up later, the
Hmm.
Carolina Panthers game that's going to be happening, and week 1 against the Green Bay Packers. And the reason I said week 1 is because obviously you don't have Aaron Rodgers there anymore.
Yeah.
You have this opportunity of where this team was supposed to, on paper, look like a much, much more improved team. And you're like, that's how you put the stamp down on the season. This is a team that has beaten you. I think at that point, or now it's like 11 games in a row that the Packers have beat the Bears. It's going, you have this opportunity to go out there and change that.
Hmm.
They looked horrible doing it. And it
Yeah.
was at that moment, it was kind of like, okay, this is going to be a long season. And then it was Tampa Bay. It was like, okay, it was week 1. Let's let's take the blinders away and go. Let's see what happens against a team that beat the Vikings in kind of a really close game, and they looked bad. And I was like, okay, You know you're not going to win against the Chiefs. Like that I think most fans knew looking at that going into that game of like, okay, it's probably going to be a loss, but we want to see some fight.
Mhm.
And now you go up against the Denver Broncos, who had a 70 burger dropped on them last week against the Miami
Yeah.
Dolphins. And
Right.
this is probably going to be the game that ultimately decides if Eberflus is going to be, going to be able to continue for the next little bit.
Yeah.
And because if you're playing a game at home and you are facing a team that had 70 points dropped on them the week prior,
Yeah.
you should not be 3.5 favorite point or 3.5
Well,
underdogs going into that game.
exactly.
And that's just where the Bears are right now.
Unfortunately, yes. I'm going to play a clip of Olin Kreutz on 670 score. I believe this was the day after the Kansas City loss. And here's what he has to say about Matt Eberflus.
Then listened to Eberflus in the postgame. His message about staying together, about, don't let the noise bother you. It seemed like he was talking to the players. It seemed like he was just continuing whatever speech he had in the postgame. He talked a lot about not falling apart, about staying together, about the outside noise, blah, blah, blah. But that's a message really not for the public, but for the team.
Yeah, it is. And I'm sure he's talking to his team, and I'm sure he's a man looking for answers, right? I've never been through this 13-game losing streak now. Not only losing, but losing pretty handily, losing by double digits, not looking like you're even in the game or even competing. So I think he's probably giving, I don't know, Mully, I don't know if he's talking to the media, if he's talking to his team. He might be talking to himself, right? He might be telling himself, look, I got to stay in this. I got to stay the course. I got to believe in the things I'm teaching and I'm saying. And he's talking probably to that whole building, because right now I've been in buildings like this before. We went over on the post-game show last night. Me and Patrick Manley start to our NFL career, 4-12, 6-10, 5-11, right? We weren't very good here. We did not have a lot of talent. It took us a long time to get to 2005, where we had back-to-back seasons, which would have been my 8th and 9th year in the NFL. And I know exactly what they're going through in that building. I know when you walk in that building and you look at each other and think, man, we're not a good football team. We do not have the talent to compete. And then you're saying that the coach is saying things, and you're looking at him like that's not true, but I'm going to keep working hard here and trying to get better at my game, try to elevate my game here. And I know if I elevate my game, even though it sounds selfish, if I elevate my game to a Pro Bowl level, there's no way that can't help the team.
So that's been the theme, and that's like the only thing that Matt Eberflus and his incompetent coaching staff can basically hold on to at this moment. So, looking at this Sunday's game versus the Denver Broncos, certainly if the Bears lose this game at home to a team that had 70 burger dropped on them last Sunday against the Miami Dolphins, certainly some sort of an action has to be done. So there's two scenarios I'm thinking right now. Number one, there's three. Number one, because the Washington game is next Thursday and it's such a short week, unfortunately nothing gets done. Number two, following the Washington game, I would say maybe Luke Getsy gets fired as another scapegoat, a sacrificial lamb, I should say, made by Matt Eberflus, because he already lost Alan Williams. So now Luke Getsy becomes the next sacrificial lamb. Number three, the ownership and Kevin Warren, obviously here's a wild card here, gets involved and decide to fire both Eberflus and Getsy, and promote somebody from within. Those are three plausible scenarios if the Bears look just unprepared, uninterested, and just completely, get decimated by Denver. And then there's a possibility of that happening exists because number one, it's the Chicago Bears, and number two, their secondary is certainly decimated by injuries this week. Brendon, your thoughts on this game and the possibility that this could be the final days of Matt Eberflus and Luke Getsy.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really good point. There's three possibilities, but I'm going to throw another possibility here with you that the game Bears end up losing this one, and if it happens poorly, like I unfortunately think that it might be. My mom is a Denver Broncos fan, and all week I've been saying to her, I'm like, listen, like your team is about to just get an easy victory here. But I think the Bears are ultimately, they know that if Eberflus doesn't win this game, they can't necessarily fire him because they do have that Thursday night game and to try to just work something out there. So realistically, it's probably going to be the Bears sit down and they say to him, they go, if they do lose to the Broncos and it does look bad enough, they go, listen, Matt, it just hasn't worked out. We're keeping you on until the end of the Thursday night game just because we can't move on from you right now. It's just going to be too tricky for us to set something up. So unfortunately, your last game is ultimately going to be that Thursday night game. Unfortunately, for a lot of Chicago Bears fans, I don't think Luke Getsy gets fired at all this year. Just because, unfortunately, at the moment, who are the Bears going to promote up in that offensive room? It's just going to be.
I'll throw in one guy possibly Andrew Janocko, the quarterback's coach, or Tyke Tolbert, the receivers coach. I could see one of them getting that job. If I think Tyke Tolbert is a very good wide receivers coach. He's worked in the league for quite a while, so he might be get promoted to maybe interim coach if the Bears decide to move away from him. So that's a very interesting scenario. Maybe there's also talks among people within Twitter that maybe they could bring in somebody like Greg Roman, who is a former OC with the 49ers and the Ravens, certainly have a lot of experience working with the running quarterbacks like Colin Kaepernick and Lamar Jackson as well. And then maybe Jim Caldwell, who was actually a finalist for this job, that eventually went to Eberflus. So, they're scrambling certainly, and then Bears certainly would have to figure out a way to get the most out of Justin Fields before we reach a certain conclusion. Certainly Justin shouldn't be used as a sacrificial lamb by the coaching staff, who are very desperate to keep their job, and benching him and going to Tyson Bagent isn't going to make that much of a difference, in my opinion. What do you think?
I love Tyson. I love what I saw from him during the preseason, but that's preseason love,
Exactly. Yes.
That that's puppy dog love, just one of those things where it doesn't really matter. I don't think Tyson coming in is going to solve all the issues. We might see one of those guys come in, like the Greg Romans, but one of the guys that I would kind of like to see the Bears bring in, if Eberflus does in fact get moved on from, is Lovie Smith for just the rest of the year. Obviously coming in just as the interim head coach. At least that way he knows the Chicago Bears. He was the former coach here. The defensive side, kind of similar to what he was running back in his day. So that might be a situation that they could do. But it's going to be really interesting to see what happens, because if the Bears lose badly against the Broncos, a change needs to be made. And unfortunately, I think we might not just necessarily see it just be the coaching staff. You could see very potentially that Ryan Poles is part of that group that gets moved on from, because,
Sure.
As much as Ryan Poles we all loved the move when he came in, and he said we're going to take the North and never give it back, and that got us all fired up. And it was like,
Yes.
yeah. Right now you're looking at all the moves that he's made, and you can just poke holes in every single one of them, and you're just kind of going like, okay, well, that Chase Claypool move, and then this, and then that, and so it might be Kevin Warren coming in, and I think Kevin Warren is an incredibly smart dude who has a lot of very much kind of like a football mind philosophy, and that was probably the best hire the Chicago Bears have probably made in Lord knows how long. And I think Kevin Warren is potentially going to step in here and say to the McCaskies, listen, the way that you guys have been doing this before has not worked. You guys brought me in, obviously, to try to finalize and help out with that stadium deal. But like now, if we want people to actually come to that stadium and watch, we need to make sure that we get this right. And I think we could potentially see, the three of Poles, Getsy, and Eberflus all potentially being moved on from, because right now it just hasn't looked pretty on all facets of, just the head coaching standpoint, the offensive coordinator. And, as much as I don't like to criticize the GMs, because those are some of my favorite people out there, but the GM move in Poles.
Yeah. I have moved. I have completely moved on from Ryan Poles as well. I know this is only his second year, unfortunately. None of the moves so far that he has made hasn't looked good. Even the ones from last year as well. Justin Jones. He talks a good game, but he doesn't produce much on the field. Certainly, the draft picks, Dominic Robinson hasn't been very good at all. He's a older guy transitioning to the defensive end position. Last year in a season, like in his pro debut against the 49ers, he had a very good game, but since then he has been an afterthought, has completely gone AWOL. Nate Davis is certainly hasn't been playing much, and hopefully he is ready to rededicate himself, and hopefully the interior offensive line will be much better moving forward. Jaquan Brisker has been hurt a lot. Kyler Gordon has also hurt. Certainly the production hasn't been there for neither one of them. I am still one of the few people who thinks that Darnell Wright was a right pick over Jalen Carter because of Carter's off the field issues. Certainly, Carter has looked good in the with the Eagles. Certainly has more talent on defense, but I'm still in the mindset that you have to protect Justin Fields throughout the entire season, so that he can be given the opportunity to showcase himself. But a lot of the moves certainly hasn't panned out, and more importantly, I know they said it's a forced marriage between Eberflus and Ryan Poles, but they both share the same agent together, and he chose Eberflus. Okay, so that's an undeniable fact, and this is starting to mirror the Trestman era back in 2014. With all the leaks and players complaining. Chase Claypool went on yesterday about how he's not being used properly. For a guy who hasn't done much and has a questionable work ethic. Certainly, the last guy you want to see is the Chase Claypool complaining about how he's been used. So, the players versus coaching staff is certainly a very very concerning right now. And another loss to a Broncos game tomorrow could really push the players over the edge. I think it's going to be really, really ugly. I think the coaches are going to start, maybe blaming the players more. I didn't touch on this during this week's press conference, Brendon, about, both Eberflus and Getsy complaining about the details and stuff like that. It sounded like they were really starting to throw players under the bus as well. It's kind of like a really things are tense, and there's players and coaches are really looking at this game as a must win, and then if it doesn't turn out that way, there could be a lot of finger pointing moving forward behind closed doors, or even, situation where, players like Claypool openly complain about, if not already.
Yeah. Right now, it just feels like a marriage that two people are trying to force fully stay together. And ultimately, it's just one of those things where everyone would just be happier if they would split up. And, again, the season has started off so poorly that if we moved on from Eberflus, Getsy, and Poles, that it's like, okay, well, that all that means is that we're going to start fresh next year. And, then that's where the hope is going to be. And, that might be what saves the Chicago Bears season, is to move on. Again, maybe if you bring in a guy like Greg Roman and, have Lovie Smith as the interim head coach, see what happens. And then you start looking at potential new head coaches next year, and then just doing this complete overhaul. And it's going to be really interesting to see what happens with this game. And ultimately, as much as we like to joke about what the Broncos team has looked like this year, I've actually started to refer to them as more of the donkeys, because they don't really deserve the Broncos name right now. But the Broncos, they have a very smart head coach in Sean Payton. They have an offense that has looked really good all year long. Again, they kind of struggled week one, but that was kind of one of those things where, it's week one. No one really ever looks that good. They put up, I think it was 33 points against the Washington Commanders in what was a really exciting game. That game came down pretty much to the final play of the game. Sure. And then obviously going up against Miami, Miami, they have a very, very good defensive coordinator that Bears fans know very well in Vic Fangio. Yes. And, they put up 20 points, and yeah, sure, some of those points were in garbage time, but they were still able to put up 20. And this Bears defense is probably the worst defense in football right now. And I think the Bears, or the Broncos offense, is probably going to have kind of their coming out game of where they figure things out. And it feels more likely that that's going to be the case, as opposed to the Bears defense holds them down and figures everything out. And then obviously I'm hoping that the Bears go out there and put up 70 points of their own against the Broncos defense. But, you got to think realistically in some of these situations. And it's luckily I'm only going to be able to watch half the game tomorrow, because then I got to go skedaddle off to work.
Okay.
But
are you calling games tomorrow?
I'm working behind the scenes for games.
Okay. What game are you doing?
Junior hockey.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's right. You're up in Canada. So, hockey season is just around the corner then.
Hockey season is pretty much in full swing here, getting into the full swing of situations. But so for me, I'm pretty much going to be watching the first half of that game, and I'll probably be looking at this game going, depending on how it goes. If it's a really close game, I might just be in the car with the phone on. It's just like, okay, that happened. Okay,
right.
Don't crash.
Well, listen to ESPN 1000 app or something like that.
Exactly, and it's going to be a very interesting week to see for sure, just because we don't know what this Bears team is at the moment, and there's just been so much noise. Again, this was a quiet week for the Bears, and I think all of us were kind of like, okay, we can finally take a breath of fresh air, that we don't have, piles on piles on piles of stuff and drama coming down, but yet there's still stuff and drama popping out of, us in the media and fans looking at the coaching staff. But it's gonna be interesting. But I've got to get going here relatively shortly. So
your final score?
I think it's probably going to be 35-17.
Broncos.
The Broncos.
Okay. Well, I already submitted my article on the Bear Goggles On, which, by the way, both of us write. So if you're a Bears fan, for unbiased coverage that without the paywall and all that kind of stuff, I hope you will certainly start paying attention to our website as well. I'm going to share the website as well here. I wrote an article already submitting my preview for the Broncos game. Certainly, both teams are 0-3, coming off of bad losses. A lot of desperation for both teams right now. Sean Payton certainly getting really angry with the local media this past week. Certainly things are not working out for them, but at least I think with the Bears, secondary injuries before, I thought that the Bears would win 27-17. But right now it doesn't look good. If the Bears somehow can win this game and then also pull off a Thursday night as well, then season might be still salvageable. But if the Bears, because of their secondary depth issue, gives up a lot of big yards, and we've seen that with the Matt Eberflus's soft coverage defense, I don't feel that optimistic right now. But we will see what happens after this game is over and what kind of things are in store for the Chicago Bears. Well, listen, Brendon, I really appreciate your time today. I hope you have a wonderful game that you have to call tomorrow, and hopefully we'll get to do this again, with or without Rishab. And certainly we are planning to work on a Bears theme podcast, and we could certainly use your knowledge and expertise, being in media and also doing film studies as well. So thanks for your time. If you're interested in following Brendon, please follow him on Twitter at Donald Brendon. That's a Brendon. You could see his time on the name there. I can be found on Twitter at Asian Sports Fan 1 on Twitter. Brendon, thanks for your time, and let's do this again next week.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me. A lot of fun.
Thank you very much.